Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here with the first installment of a new series I'd like to do revolving around pitching potential ideas for new forms of DLC for the Total War Warhammer series. While I do have a great fondness for the two current formats of the Lord packs and the race DLCs respectively, personally I think these have come to be somewhat restrictive in their design. The race packs obviously have become utterly amazing and impactful additions to the game, but we're likely near the end of those already, as Game 1 managed 4 separate ones, while Game 2 only had half that number. Game 3 will likely struggle to match having 2 race DLCs, unless Creative Assembly gets permission from Games Workshop to really stretch their creative muscles, which seems unlikely, as in Warhammer 2 we never saw any notable steps towards things like reimagining Araby or including the Southern Realms. This means in the future, things are really starting to look like an endless stream of Lord packs, which while an enjoyable form of DLC is a tad one-note and doesn't allow some really new ideas to flourish. So, I would like to toss out some ideas on new ways that the game could be improved and receive new content with unique forms of DLC. This would of course have the added benefit of giving a much larger selection of factions new content, so we're not trapped in the situation of having to wait years to see a scrap of content for any particular faction. Which I'm sure those of you who are fans of Norska, Warriors of Chaos, Beastmen, Wood Elves, Dwarves, and Vampire Counts all know exactly what I'm talking about. That is enough of an explanation, I think. It is time for us to get to the real meat of the video now and start dropping ideas and some sweet lore goodness. For the first episode, I believe the absolute best DLC that I would want to see come to life would be, as I'm sure you guessed from the title, Legendary Heroes. Before we dive in though, let's establish some ground rules for how I would imagine this to work. In this new idea, my proposal would be a series of smaller DLCs that focus on bringing one legendary hero to a selection of races. Each of these DLC packs would feature somewhere between 4 to 8 new heroes, with the goal being that every single race eventually gains at least one new hero added in per round of these, I guess you could say, or wave. These new characters would be available to every sub-faction within the race they're designed for. That way they could be taken regardless of which legendary lord is selected at the start of the campaign. So just like Lord Croak for the Lizardmen as an example, and you would only have to own one character of that race in order to have access to these heroes. So you wouldn't need any of the additional Lord packs or anything else like that, because we don't want to force people to have to own multiple DLCs. With the exception, of course, being if it was a race pack type race, then yeah, obviously you'd want to own that. But let's move on. Finally, due to this being paid content, we can afford to go for the truly unique characters where possible, since there would need to be some actual push for the characters to justify the price tag. Though I imagine these DLCs would be the cheapest variant, depending on how many characters arrived in each one. Excluding the blood packs, of course, those are pretty cheap. Finally, because I'm the one and only Loremaster of Sotek, I'll be pitching not one, but 2 legendary heroes for every faction. Because why not? With the exception of one, but we'll get to that. Alright, that takes care of all the annoying introduction information, so let us get started. I'll be breaking down the selection of heroes by game and then hit it in alphabetical order. So we'll start with Bretonnia and work our way through the Game 1 factions before turning to Game 2 if there's time. Without further ado, let us begin. In the chivalric lands of Bretonnia, there are a nearly infinite number of mighty heroes worthy of being selected to represent the Hero of Legend slot. To narrow this absurd list down a good bit, I'll be focusing on selecting 2 individuals that would bring some unique flavor, so there won't be any classic monster-slaying knights here today. Sacrilege, I know. Deal with it. The first Bretonnian I'll be presenting as a viable new hero is none other than the Warhammer World's interpretation of Robin Hood, and the one and only Bertrand the Brigand. As the name implies, he is not exactly the most beloved individual of the many corrupt and cruel lords of Bretonnia. He is not truly a brigand though, but rather a man who stood against the unfair taxation of his fellow countrymen, and found himself forced on the run for having such radical ideas as treating the peasantry like human beings. When Bertrand fled his home of Bergerac, he was joined by his closest allies of, and I want to reiterate, I am not French, I do not speak French, and I'm really sorry in advance for how I pronounce these, Hugo le Petit and Guy le Gros, in addition to several peasant bowmen. This merry band would continue to be joined by other virtuous outlaws and come to be known as the Bowmen of Bergerac. When not hiding out in the woods, surviving solely by their wits, the bowmen would follow Bertrand on his famous acts of striking out against the cruel, unchivalrous lords and terrifying monstrosities. The greatest feat performed by the brigand of legend was when he slew the great flapping monster of Chateau Mal, likely a jabberslythe, with a single black arrow fired from his longbow. Despite being declared an outlaw, he has gone on to battle alongside many noble knights and join armies against the truly vile and cruel creatures that would threaten his homeland. You may note that in later lore, his little merry band, the Bowmen of Bergerac, have been vaguely renamed to be known as the Faceless, which you may have heard about if you've been searching around on the internet for potential new unit ideas for Bretonnia. With his lore entry out of the way, let's talk how I could see him implemented into the game. Bertrand the Brigand should be a legendary hero that would have a simple quest to unlock, perhaps revolving around a series of objectives that have the player going after and defeating a cruel and unchivalrous Bretonnian lord who needs to be removed from office, so to speak. Alternatively, it could be as simple as recruiting a certain number of peasant bowmen to unlock him. When unlocked, Bertrand would act as a range-focused buff character who would provide notable bonuses to peasant bowmen and field trebuchets in his army, with a mix of passives and active auras to increase their accuracy and damage. For his regular attacks, I would suggest having him deal a substantial amount of non-AP damage with his longbow, but having a healthy range and reload rate. Perhaps a global passive that would allow him to make everyone more accurate while having an active AoE aura that grants missile damage and reload rate bonuses to really milk those peasant archers and mounted yeoman archers for all they're worth. For personal abilities, the most obvious would of course be his single magic item, the Black Arrow. A bold missile, tipped with a dragon's tooth and fletched with black carrion feathers. It should be a single-use ability that allows him to fire off an absurdly powerful shot to just absolutely wreck whatever it impacts. To really fit the original narrative, it should do hilarious amounts of armor-piercing magical damage, so only things like missile resistance, ward saves, and magic resistance would be able to mitigate the damage. As in the lore, the arrows struggled against magical armor. Furthermore, he should be able to unlock abilities that represent his two most loyal henchmen of Hugo and Guy. For Hugo, it could be an alternate shooting ability, where Bertrand channels the might of his strongest ally, granting him a notable temporary bonus to his missile strength and weapon strength while active. Finally, to represent Guy, Bertrand should unlock a buff where he can pass around the big man's wine flask to an allied unit, granting them the unbreakable trait for a good long time, but lowering their melee attack and missile accuracy as they get properly wasted. Easily my favorite tabletop ability this guy basically had. Finally, his highest tier unique ability should be turning the peasant bowman in the army he joins into the proper Bowmen of Bergerac, or the Faceless if you want to update the name, granting them the stalk and snipe skill set and longer range. The main weaknesses to Bertrand, on the other hand, should mainly be that he struggles significantly against heavy armor, both when shooting and fighting in close combat. I would expect him to have surprisingly good melee attack and defense, and he's pretty scrappy for an archer, but ultimately his weapon strength in combat shouldn't be anything insane. On the campaign map, I would expect Bertrand to essentially act as the ultimate inspiration for his fellow peasants, and specialize in scouting out enemy armies. His big features would revolve around granting a large line of sight bonus on the campaign map, increasing ambush defense chance for any army he joins, and finally, having a notable impact on increasing farm economy income, either globally or maybe just the province that he's standing in. Finally, I think the coolest thing that the brigand could bring into the table would be the potential to negate the penalties for traditionally unchivalrous actions, as his outlaw nobility allows him to assist the Bretonnians in stretching their code of honor for the greater good a bit. So imagine if he allowed an army he joined to use the ambush stance without penalty, or allowed them to sack settlements without negative chivalry as he reclaims the riches from the foul and corrupt. Could be a fun way to have a hero that truly expands the options available to the lucky army that happens to have him aboard. Finally, for his actual appearance in the game, I would of course suggest basing him heavily on his original tabletop model, which is quite literally just Robin Hood. However, since it would likely just be him roaming around without Hugo le Petit and Guy le Gros by his immediate side, it would be a touch nice to include aspects of their models as a part of his Total War model. So perhaps instead of him wielding a sword when in melee, he could instead have the two-handed staff traditionally used by Hugo, and upon his belt or strapped somewhere to his body, he could have a giant flask for Guy's wine, instead of the comically full cask that I don't know if he's a monk, but he looks like a monk, had strapped to his back. I should note I would love to see the other two henchmen of the notorious brigand automatically equipped to Bertrand as followers, in his profile for campaign at least, providing various little buffs to his stats and such. Alright, so that's going to wrap up our first Bretonnian. Let's not waste any time and jump right into our second contender for the coveted hero of legend position, Tristan le troubadour. Tristan is a questing knight who set out from his home in Guisereau to seek out the Grail. But what makes him unique is that he is quite a gifted singer. Although skilled with lance and blade, the troubadour has been blessed by the lady with the ability to serenade his allies with heroic ballads of Bretonnia that can inspire those around him to accomplish superhuman feats. The focus of Tristan's story began when he started off on his quest to seek the Grail, though he did not do so alone. He was joined by the loyal Jules le Jongleur, who had long been a member of the knight's court back home. The two would travel the nation of Bretonnia in search of adventure, and made a name for themselves as wondrous entertainers at many castles, as well as participating in numerous great battles. Their most famous venture, of course, being the bloody Battle of Montfort, where the two fought against an invading army from the Empire seeking to claim control of Axbite Pass. In pursuit of a traitorous knight that was aiding the unchivalrous foreigners, Tristan and Jules arrived late to the battle as fire and death consumed the field. The questing knight charged straight into the fray, raising up his booming voice to sing one of the legendary chansons. Inspired by his melodic voice, the remaining knights rallied behind Tristan and fought like men possessed until the sun dipped behind the horizon and reinforcements finally arrived from Paravon to send the Empire troops fleeing from the field. The troubadour and his foul-mouthed jester would then pursue after their foe until they finally caught up to the treacherous Sir Artanic and his remaining Reichland soldiers. Vastly outnumbered, exhausted from the long pursuit, and facing down over 80 guns primed to fire, things seemed dire for Tristan and the 10 knights alongside him. By the lady's grace, however, an incredibly lost handful of knights-errant arrived and charged towards the handgunners and halberdiers, leaving the troubadour no choice but to join alongside them. Singing a heroic ballad as they faced certain doom, the knights hurtled through a hail of bullets towards their foe. Inspired as they were, the Knights of Bretonnia refused to halt, even as most of their number were torn apart before slamming into the enemy lines with bone-crushing force. Faced with an enemy seemingly careless of death and butchering all who came within reach, the remaining soldiers of Reichland threw down their weapons and fled, while Tristan finally confronted Sir Artanic at long last. The duel was brief, and on the fourth strike, the questing knight cleaved his foe's skull in two and claimed victory. Since then, the strange pair have journeyed across their homeland in hopes of discovering the Grail and striking out to protect all those pure and innocent. That wraps up the lore summary, so let's talk about what the Singing Knight would bring to the table as a hero of legend. I'll start once more, as I will with every character, with some potential ways to acquire him once the campaign has gotten rolling. It seems the most suitable quest to summon Tristan to your side would revolve around hunting down the treacherous Sir Artanic, but other ideas I could see being suitable may be conquering the Empire Fortress in Axbite Pass, or perhaps simply having a hero or lord successfully complete a questing vow mission. Once unlocked, Tristan le Troubadour would be a unique combat hero who specializes in powerful buff auras as he sings one of the various chansons to augment nearby allies. In addition to his music, he would also benefit from the cunning wit of Jules le Jongleur to aid him in fighting enemies in close combat. Overall, he would essentially be a survival-based character who can hit reasonably hard with his lance on the charge, but specializes more in defense due to his shield and heavy armor. As he levels up, I could see his skill tree prioritizing upgrading his 3 chansons in addition to substantially augmenting his combat capabilities. He would obviously start with the questing vow unlocked, and I would love to see his passive abilities focusing on providing notable bonuses to the leadership, combat capabilities, and vigor of knights in any army he joins. When it comes to personal abilities, the big features of Tristan would of course revolve around his musical abilities and the distractions provided by Jules. Starting with his jester companion, the clever peasant is infamous for having perfected the art of enraging opponents so that they lash out at the nimble Jules instead of properly focusing their attention on Tristan. To represent this, I would suggest simply giving Tristan an active ability called Cunning Wit, which would cause any selected enemy to suffer from rampage for a limited time. It could be potentially limited to only affecting lords and heroes, or it could just be used on anyone but have a shorter duration. With that out of the way, we can finally move on to the real meat of the character, which is of course his chansons. Just going down the list, the 3 famous Songs of Noble Valor should have the following effects. First is the Chanson de Bataille, a ballad that tells of great Bretonnian victories from ages past, to inspire all those who hear to greater acts of heroism to match or even surpass their ancestors. This should increase the melee attack of all allies within a certain distance. Second is the Chanson du Grail, a ballad about the Lady of the Lake and her sacred grail, to fill all those who hear it with the raging flames of faith. This should grant significant magic resistance and a small amount of missile resistance to all allies in range as the lady protects them. Finally is the Chanson of Gilles, a ballad recounting the story of Gilles le Breton to fill those who hear it with pride and honor. This should grant all allies within range a substantial bonus to leadership. To keep his character balanced, it would probably make sense that whenever Tristan activates any of his songs, for all of them to go on cooldown as he lets his vocal cords recover for a moment. In campaign, for his skill tree, it should focus on lowering these cooldowns and granting him something like a passive, perhaps, so whenever he sings, it grants vigor regeneration to all affected units in addition to the normal effects. Perhaps the area of effect for his chansons could be increased as his ultimate upgrade to be much larger or maybe even map-wide. Perhaps they could even get stronger, providing additional bonuses on top of the ones they do at base level. Looking at his downsides, the main weaknesses to Tristan le Troubadour would revolve heavily around his lack of damage dealing stats and skills. So essentially, he'd be roaming around the battlefield providing powerful buffs, but ultimately, if forced to battle some monster, elite unit, or combat-focused character, he'd be put into a rough spot. In addition, if he battled an enemy who could force him on cooldown, like Kotep or high magic users, he could be heavily countered. Looking to his use on the campaign map, I would see Tristan focusing heavily on buffing the army he joins by providing a substantial bonus to campaign movement, which would be an excellent buff to have on the board for Bretonnian armies. Furthermore, I would have him steal a page from Alariel, the Everqueen, and grant a temporary buff to any settlement he ends a turn in, as they're enchanted by the performances put on by Tristan and Jules. This could provide a solid increase to public order, all forms of local income, and local growth while the buff is active. Finally, for his appearance in-game, I would heavily suggest just using his original tabletop model, though for a truly unique version, I say he should pull the loot from his back and play it whenever the player activates one of his chansons. You know, if you're going to be paying for them instead of as a free LC idea. If Creative Assembly really wanted to go the extra mile with this model, they could also have Jules mounted right behind him, as in their tail when speed was required, the Jester would hop up behind his master as they charge forward, instead of simply doing somersaults using the stick with a pony head on it that he normally would. Could be humorous to have a Bretonnian knight stabbing with his lance as a peculiar Jester behind him points and laughs at foes nearby to taunt them. That wraps up the suggestions for Bretonnia. And good lord, I can already tell my initial estimates for how long this little episode would take were wildly off. Anyway, be sure to let me know down in the comment section which of these two chivalrous heroes would you select to join as a hero of legend. Do you think there's someone better that I should have talked about, but didn't? If so, let me know who you would choose to be Bretonnia's one. Remember, you only get one hero of legend. Hey guys, so I'm recorded this so many times trying to just get it to the point without tripping over myself because it's unscripted. But it occurred to me that I don't want this video to be a billion years long, which it's turning out to be at the rate that I got this Bretonnia segment done. I have a ton of the races already written, so I figured I'll just turn this into a daily series instead of working my ass off and ruining the rest of my schedule to try and record some big super episode. So I hope you guys can understand that and are okay with it. Instead of having like 5 or more races per episode, it's just going to be 1 race per episode. And most of them will have 2 characters. Some of them will only have 1 character. For instance, like Vampire Coast and I forget what the other one was. But in any event, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please let me know down in the comment section below which of the 2 characters that I introduced to you would prefer to see, or if there's a third, I would love to see your proposal on them. I take it you kind of caught on to the format, but just in case you're forgetting, just, you know, a brief intro, a little lore snippet of who they are, how they would be acquired in campaign, what their focus would be, what kind of skills, abilities they would be, what their weakness would be, what they do on the campaign map, and how they should look. Those are kind of the 8 little subjects that are for every character. But in any event, I'm going to go ahead and shut up so I can get out of here. I appreciate you guys coming by. I'm hoping what I think I'm going to do with this is we'll just have Ogre Kingdom's Q&A stuff in the mornings, and we'll have this stuff in the afternoons. That way you get 2 videos a day. Isn't that exciting? Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you tomorrow for the Beastmen.